Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video series, I am explaining how to get a declaration of matrimonial nullity in the Catholic Church. In the previous videos, we have seen the incapacity, the exclusion, and the error. In this video, we are going to focus on the remaining grounds, that is, the nullities that come from external pressures and from conditions attached to the consent by the parties. Since marriage is such an important milestone in people's lives, matrimonial consent must be given with as much freedom as possible. Regrettably, however, sometimes people get married because they are subject to duress and threats. Depending on the gravity of the pressures, the marriage can be invalid. This is the case in the ground of violence, which takes place when someone is physically forced to marry. The violence we are talking about here is a physical force, which is exercised at the precise time of the wedding, a force so overwhelming that it doesn't leave space for the person to act with freedom. This ground rarely takes place because it is very difficult that a wedding be celebrated when either party is suffering violence in a direct manner during the actual celebration. Nonetheless, so that we get an idea, it would be something similar to what Marian suffers in the movie Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves with Kevin Costner. Marian is dragged to the altar by the Sheriff of Nottingham, who is literally forcing her before the bishop who is going to marry them. Fortunately, Robin Hood interrupts this farce, so there wouldn't be an apparent marriage to declare invalid. However, if Marian had pronounced her consent, the marriage would have been invalid due to the ground of violence. Even though this external and direct violence is so rare, unfortunately, it is relatively common that the parties to a marriage feel pressured or even threatened to marry. In order to protect the freedom of the spouses, the law of the Church makes these marriages celebrated under fear invalid. For the marriage to be invalid, the fear must come from without. Sometimes people feel fear without anyone threatening them, and sometimes this fear is the reason why they get married. The fear of this ground is not something imaginary and without foundation in reality, but the fear that is instilled by other people in the party. For the marriage to be invalid due to great fear, it is not necessary that the person who pressures or threatens the party does it with the intention that the wedding be celebrated. What really matters is that the person feels trapped and that they believe that marriage is their only way out, that only if they marry they will be free from the threats. This ground of nullity is called grave fear because only a fear that is grave can produce this feeling of being trapped and that marriage is the only way out. One example of this nullity would be the wedding of Sansa with Ramsay in Game of Thrones. Sansa doesn't want to marry Ramsay because the Boltons betrayed her family and killed her brother Robb. But Littlefinger, who wants the wedding to take place for his own personal interest, pressures Sansa, reminding her that if she doesn't marry Ramsay, she's going to spend the rest of her life running away. Then Sansa agrees to the wedding because she doesn't see another way out. Evidently, among several other grounds, Sansa's wedding to Ramsay would have been invalid due to grave fear. Reverencial fear is a form of grave fear. In the ground of reverential fear, the fear is grave because of the relationship between the party to the marriage and the person who threatens. It is a relationship in which the party considers the threatener as an authority, as someone to be respected, admired, or feared. Reverential fear consists in the fear that the party feels to lose the respect and trust of this person, and therefore the fear to lose the relationship itself. This can be the case, for instance, with young people who feel compelled to marry to please their parents. One example of this kind of relationship could be that of Rose with her mother in the movie Titanic. The relationship between them is so intimate that the mother doesn't need to pronounce threats for her daughter to be afraid. If Rose wouldn't have run away with Jack, and if she had married the millionaire Huckley, the marriage would have probably been invalid due to reverential fear. The ground of grave fear is similar to the grounds of lack of internal freedom and total simulation, which we have seen in previous videos. However, there are important differences among them. In cases of lack of internal freedom, there is no consent because the person is incapable to give it. In cases of total simulation, the consent is only apparent because the person refuses marriage on purpose. In cases of grave fear, the person gives a consent, but this consent is invalid because it was given under duress. Other than free, matrimonial consent must be unconditional. Since marriage is the mutual gift of the spouses to each other, the ideal is for the marriage to be free from conditions. Consent is the only cause of marriage. If there is no consent, there is no marriage. However, when the parties subject their consent to the fulfillment of a condition, there will only be consent if the condition is met. If the condition is not met, there is no consent and there is no marriage either. Conditions can be about the future, the present, or the past. Marriages celebrated under condition about the future are all invalid, aside from whether the condition was met or not. The problem with the condition about the future is that we cannot know whether the marriage was valid or not until we know whether the condition was fulfilled or not. For instance, let's say that a woman subjects the validity of her marriage to a condition. I marry you, but on the condition that you never smoke again. Even if her husband never smokes again, this woman won't know that the condition has been met until the end of the marriage, that is, until one of the spouses is dead. In other words, she won't know if they are married until they are not married anymore. To avoid this issue, the law makes all the marriages celebrated under condition of future invalid. This condition about the future must not be mistaken with the so-called potestative condition, which is not a condition about the future in the proper sense, but a condition that requests from the other party to make in the present a serious commitment about the future. In our previous example, it wouldn't be so much I marry you on the condition that you never smoke again, but I marry you on the condition that you make the firm commitment to never smoke again. In these cases of potestative condition, there is no matrimonial nullity. Marriages subject to condition about the present or about the past are valid or not depending on whether the condition has been met or not. One example of condition about the present would be, I only want to marry you if you don't have a Facebook account. If the other party has an account in this social network, the marriage is invalid. An example of condition about the past would be, I don't want to marry you if you didn't have a dog in your childhood. In this case, the wedding would be invalid if the other party didn't have a dog while growing up. With the condition, we have finished our review of the most relevant grounds of nullity. Once we have identified which are the ground or grounds that best fit our case, we must go to trial and prove before the tribunal that the marriage is invalid. In the following video, we are going to conclude this series explaining how the process for declaration of nullity works. Before going to trial, it is always very important to consult our case with an expert in canon law. It is always advisable to contact the diocesan tribunal beforehand to ask for practical orientation. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please share it with those who may find it useful. If you have questions, write them below in the comment section and I will be happy to help.